One of the stories that came across our radar yesterday seemed to first appear in the Irish Times. Gavin Cummiskey writing, it's in the newspaper this morning. Ireland legends express outrage as tour rejected. So this was the news that the IRFU, it has just emerged, as I said, in the last 24 hours, that they had turned down the opportunity to take on a tour to Australia that would run alongside the men's tour that's obviously getting underway tomorrow, and a big opportunity for exposure for the women's team and a big opportunity for them to gain some experience, and a lot of good reasons to think that that might have been a good opportunity for the Irish women's team, but it wasn't to be. And to discuss this, I'm delighted to say we're joined on the line by Ireland international Sophie Spence and the former Ireland captain Fiona Coghlan. Good morning to you both, and thanks for taking the call. Fiona, I'll go to you first. Just your initial reaction to the idea that the IRFU, I know, have responded to it as well. They say they're wanting to focus on the November fixtures, which doesn't necessarily seem to fully address the rationale behind this decision.
Yeah, they said that it's part of the strategy to focus on the November internationals. I don't know the strategy that they're working off, because currently they're undergoing a review and a new strategy to come out. So I find it a bit hard to believe that that's the reason. Like, I have no problem saying no to it, this tour, if there is something in place and there is plans in place and there is a pathway that they see it going, because it is a huge financial burden. I know Josie and Tucker offered to pay for the accommodation, but there is a lot more cost around it, the flights and staffing and everything along those lines. So I know it is a huge financial burden, but I don't think the real reason that it's based on the November internationals, that's why they're not doing it. I do think it's a financial issue, which is fine, but come out and say it.
Yeah, it seems as if, from what we read in the Irish Times, that Aer Lingus might have been happy to partner up to take care of the flights, and as you say, the accommodation seemed to be looked after, so the financial end of it didn't necessarily seem to have been the biggest burden. But it's the transparency thing, Fiona, clearly, that from what you're saying is one of the main issues at hand here.
Yeah, I think this has been a problem, and this is why there's been so much, I suppose, outrage over the last year with regards around the women's team. It's just not known the direction that the IRFU want to go with women's rugby. And I'm not even just talking about the national team, I'm talking about across the board from grassroots. And I think that's really important. I think the focus is always put on the national team, but for me, it's about the development of the game from grassroots all the way up, and the pathways young girls can get involved in the game and then transition through if they want to, and if they're good enough to make the international team. And I've been involved in the game for 15 years, and I just haven't seen that pathway really improve at all. Yes, there's more young girls playing, but it's not a structured pathway in order for them to prove it. Sophie,
you might just take on that point for us, if you would. It does strike me that this, and it's in tandem with a bunch of other decisions that I guess have been made over the last couple of years, doesn't seem to be the most amazing message to be sending out to young women and girls who want to get involved necessarily in rugby.
Yeah, do you know, I suppose as a sport for all, you want young girls to be able to pick up a ball at the same age as boys do, and I think that's a disappointing thing. If you know, there's opportunities like this for a lot of learning and a lot of experience as a young squad to develop. Do you know, when parents are saying things like this in the public, do they want the young girls to actually continue or even try and pick up a rugby ball? So you're trying to, I suppose, create opportunities and break down those barriers I suppose, that they shouldn't be there.
And in terms of, I mean, just talk to us a small bit about the benefits that we haven't seen a huge amount of women's touring teams necessarily, and it's something that you know, maybe at some point soon can actually become a thing. And obviously, the IRFU are trying to make serious strides in that regard. But just talk to us a small bit about what can be gained, obviously, from the women's point of view in terms of where they're at the minute, and the development that could come with a tour like this.
Yeah, from the women's side of things, you know, we finished 8th in the last World Cup, so we've still got to qualify for the next World Cup, which from a new squad, there was a lot of retirements after the World Cup there last year. So from a young squad, trying to develop an opportunity now coming off the back of the Six Nations where they finished 3rd, which I think with new management was a good finish. It's all about trying to perform and get those performances together and get more time together. So the opportunity to actually travel, learn from the men's side of things as well, because these guys are professionals. If you can actually take a couple of things from them on the training ground, see what they do and how they do things, you know, it's a lot of learnings. But being in camp for a certain period of time together as well, it's that environment that you don't get as a female player, and I think that's the major thing now. We've got to wait until next November for a test match where you might only be in camp for maybe 2 days, and then you go on to the Six Nations again.
I've been reading some of you've been tweeting about it over the last 24 hours, and the frustration is very clear. What's your message to the IRFU as somebody who has just recently left the international scene?
I think, it's really important. It's like what Fee said, and a lot of us are saying, it's not just about the senior team. Obviously, very privileged to play and put on a green jersey. But for us, it's all about inspiring the next generation. We want to leave the jersey in a better place. We want young girls to be inspired. We want to be role models for them. But in order for us to do that, we need to have the resources put in place within the grassroots levels to make sure that the game is actually in a good place. The talent is there in the country. And, to see that things like this are being knocked without the resources, we're not actually going to, I suppose, get those development opportunities that we could have, that other countries are actually doing, with premierships coming up and contracts being given within the 15s game. So I think for us, it's about resourcing the game and really putting structures in place so that girls know, right, once I leave minis rugby to youth rugby, I know that my province is there. Now, what's the next step? How do I get onto the national squad? Do I have to wait and compete against 25-plus-year-olds, or is there going to be an under-20 squad that I can actually take an opportunity and show what I can do?
Just showing a tweet for people who are tuned in on offtheball.com and the audio player. We're just showing a tweet here from Seni Naupu, Ireland International. She says, sick of staying quiet about missed opportunities for shared learning. Been working on a paper investigating a model of promotion and development in women's sport that could be sustainable for women's rugby in Ireland. But what's the point, she asks, when a key characteristic of successful models is integrating with the men? It does seem, Fiona, just looking at it and reading about it over the last little while, there's been a report into Sophie mentioned the World Cup last year. There's been a report done into that, the results of which haven't been made public. There's been another committee that's been set up to investigate the future of the women's game here. We don't know the outcome of that because it hasn't been made public yet. Is there a doubt around, Fiona, the IRFU's commitment to women's rugby here?
It's a bit hard to know because we don't really know what's going on. Yes, the review has taken place. As far as I'm aware, the results are not going to be published at the review. And the women's game will fall into the strategy, the overall RFU strategy that's supposed to be out in June. Whether that's still happening in June, I'm not sure. But I think for us to believe that they find value, I think that's the biggest thing. Do they find value in the women's game? I'm not talking about financial value. But what is the value that they find in the women's game, and are they going to invest in increasing that? And look, I don't think this is just a rugby issue. Rugby is the story today. Like, we had soccer before, we've had hockey, cricket. This is a society and a cultural shift that we need. So maybe something needs to come from government around this. And I know Sport Ireland are at the moment doing a review themselves and are going to publish a paper, and hopefully that will bring. But something big needs to happen with regards for women's sport to take the next leap. Yeah. And like as I said, it's not commercial. It's about what sport brings to the individual, what sport brings to society.
Like, it's almost in some regards a shame that we're having to talk about it in this regard, but the government would be, given the funding that's involved there, and it's happened in other sports as well, within their rights to say, listen, unless these things start to happen, we're going to withdraw some of this funding or pull back on some of this funding. I mean, it's kind of incredible that the IRFU would need that encouragement almost, but I mean, it would be within the government's remit to do something like that.
Yeah, it would, and I get there is more boys playing rugby, or there's more boys playing sport than girls. But what we need to do is get them on par, is get more girls playing sport. And how do you do that? You have to invest in it, and you have to have the pathways in place, and it's just not there in Irish sport.
How inclusive have they been in terms of those committees and reviews that have been set up, Fiona? Like, it did again strike me reading a little bit about this story picking her up last night, that somebody like yourself would be pretty ideally positioned, having captained Ireland and, you know, have a foot in the media camp as well, and with a bit of remove from having been involved in the game, would be a pretty good person to be consulting in this kind of thing. How involved do you know, in terms of yourself and maybe other players have been involved in any of those reviews?
They had a meeting with past players. We had it at Christmas time, so there was a number of past players there. They had a meeting with current squad players. They did go around all the clubs. Fiona Steed did sit on that committee as a past player, and she's now in the coaching game and in media as well. So Fiona, in fairness, is of the same level that I would be at experience-wise. I don't know really what power that committee had. Yes, they could do a review, but I don't know what the terms of reference were with regards to the recommendations that came from that review.
Why do you think
they were going to be implemented or not.
Yeah, why do you think they're holding back on those? Is it a case of that the game is in such a bad state of repair that they don't want to go public with that, or why do you think we're not getting the full story here?
I really don't know. You'd have to ask some of the IRFU for that. Like, I just think that if you want to truly reflect on your goods and bads, like you would after a team performance, you have to be brutally honest about things. And if you really want something to improve, you have to look at the good things and bad things as well. And you know, I just don't see what harm it is bringing that into the public eye and people seeing what the state is. And if the numbers aren't there, okay, that's why the money isn't in, but what do we need to do to improve the numbers and get more money in and everything like that? I think the best thing to do would be release it. And then the actions after that. For me, it's not about the strategy, it's about the implementation of the new strategy. Yeah,
and let us have some discussion about it in a public forum, I think would certainly not be the worst thing in the world. The last word to you on this one, Sophie. I mean, I don't know if you see any resolution to this. It does feel like another notch that's been on this ongoing story around the women's rugby team, the head coach story that seemed to get resolved pretty amicably in the end, but the handling of it that maybe wasn't amazing, and the World Cup preparation and all that kind of thing. I just feel like another step in that direction. But how do you see this getting resolved now, or how would you like to see it get resolved?
I think what Fiona's just touched on there, it is about being honest, and I think that honesty to look at where the IRFU are focusing on, and I think that's a bit of a respect thing as well at where we're at. But there's so many past players, whether they've just retired now or whether they've retired 5, 10, 15 years ago, who want to be involved in the game and who are good heads into knowing they've been there, they've done that, whether it's to take up an admin role, whether they take up a coaching role. But there are people on the ground who actually want to be involved and be part of this to make sure that the game is actually going to go somewhere. So I think, you know, it's brilliant. They've heard what past players, current players, clubs actually want. But it's about actually giving them, I suppose, a duty to actually take the game in a direction, but we need to know what that direction is. Does
it feel like there's a bit of a lack of respect at the minute then?
To be honest, it kind of is, yeah. I think the fact of we don't know where the game is actually focused on, is it 15s, is it 7s, is it men, is it women? It should be just rugby. And realistically, it's quite sad that we're actually having to have these discussions now. You know, if it was just the sport, we wouldn't have to be doing this now.
All right. Sophie, Spence, Fiona, Coghlan, thanks a million for taking the call this morning. At short notice as well, thanks a lot for that, because we thought it was a story that was definitely worth coming to. I'm sure there's going to be a lot more discussion about it. We hope there's a lot more discussion about it. We'd love to talk to the IRFU about it. We'd love if they would come forward with some of the findings of the committees that they've set up into those things. I can't see what harm that will do. We all understand that the game, the women's game, might be in better shape, so let's just come forward, warts and all, and I guess sort of have those discussions publicly. As I said, there is a story that was broken by Gavin Comiskey in the Irish Times, and there's lots of good stuff there. Thanks again to Sophie and Fiona for coming on to discuss all of that.